The first time I heard her shrieking across the water, I thought someone was drowning. Excuse me, excuse me. You can't just put a dock there. I had just finished wiring down the last plank when I looked up to see her blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clutching a clipboard like it was a holy relic. That was Harriet Penwell, head of the HOA board for our little community on Hollow Ridge Lake. And apparently she just discovered my dock, the same dock that had been there for over a year. I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "Can I help you?" "You bet you can," she said, storming down the slope that led to the water. "This entire dock violates HOA regulations. You need to remove it immediately. Lake access is community property and you can't just claim it like it's yours." I blinked. "Community property?" She jabbed her pen at me like she was writing a ticket in the air. "The lake is maintained by the Hollow Ridge HOA. You're required to submit dock plans to the board for approval, which you didn't. That makes this an unauthorized structure." I stared at her for a beat. "Harriet, do you even know who owns that lake?" She laughed like I'd said something hilarious. "The community does, don't play dumb. Just because your house backs onto it doesn't mean you own the lake." That's when I realized she didn't know. She had no idea. I'm Irving Beckett. I moved here 5 years ago after retiring early from the city zoning office. Bought the last house on the edge of Hollow Ridge, the one with the big backyard sloping down to the lake's edge. What Harriet and her clipboard didn't know was that I didn't just buy the house, I bought the lake too. Every square foot of it. See, the original developer ran out of money mid-project. When they auctioned off parcels, nobody noticed the lake was listed separately. I did. I bought it for a song, but I never told the HOA. Why would I? I didn't need their permission to install a dock on my own lake. Still, I kept it quiet. I figured it was better to stay under the radar. Until Harriet just had to come marching down like she was the queen of the water. "I'm giving you 72 hours to remove the dock," she barked, "or you'll be fined." "Go ahead," I said, already walking back toward my tools. "Fine me? You think I won't? I'm counting on it." She stomped off, muttering something about legal action and rogue residents. Meanwhile, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder I'd kept untouched for years: scan deeds, parcel maps, the official lake ownership transfer. She was about to pick a fight over a puddle she didn't even own, and she'd been using my lake for years, kayaking, swimming, even hosting HOA parties on floats, trespassing. Every single time, this was gonna be fun. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories. The next morning, there were 3 orange violation tags stapled to the side of my dock. They fluttered in the breeze like warning flags on a minefield. I stood there with my travel mug, watching the sun glint off the water, wondering if Harriet had been out here at dawn with a staple gun and her high horse. I didn't touch the tags. Instead, I went back inside and printed out something I hadn't needed in years: the original parcel registration for Hollow Ridge Lake. It included a notarized deed, a plat map with my name on it, and a copy of the county's zoning transfer approval. All of it clean, legal, and boring enough to make someone's eyes glaze over if they didn't know what they were looking at. By noon, I was at the HOA office, a converted guest house that sat awkwardly between 2 cul-de-sacs, like it had been forgotten during construction. A teenage receptionist with earbuds in didn't even look up. "I need to speak to Harriet Penwell," I said, setting the packet on the desk. "She's in a meeting," he said without removing the earbuds. "She's about to want to end it." That got his attention. 2 minutes later, Harriet appeared in the doorway, lips tight, eyes daring me to speak. "Back already?" she asked. "I brought you something," I said, sliding the documents toward her. "You might want to read it before you start writing more violations." She didn't invite me in, didn't offer a chair. She just flipped through the first few pages, her expression shifting from smug to confused to something else, something that looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. This can't be right," she muttered. "This says you own the lake." "It does. There must be a mistake." "There isn't. and I suggest you stop issuing citations for structures on property you don't control. Also, I'd like to formally request that the HOA refrain from using the lake for any community events unless you obtain written permission from me first." Her head snapped up. "You can't do that." "I can, and I am." She looked around like she expected backup to materialize from the walls. "You'll be hearing from our attorney." "I look forward to it." I walked out before she could come up with anything else. Less than 24 hours later, a letter showed up in my mailbox, certified, no less. It accused me of fraudulently acquiring common property, demanded immediate removal of the dock, and threatened civil action if I didn't comply. That's when I knew she wasn't just bluffing, she was escalating. So I responded the only way that made sense. I filed a cease and desist notice with a copy of my deed attached, then forwarded everything to my old friend Dennis, who worked in the county assessor's office. He confirmed that the HOA had never registered the lake as a common area. In fact, the plat map they used in their own charter didn't even show it as part of their jurisdiction. I emailed the confirmation back to the HOA's little generic address with a note, "Please stop stapling things to my dock. This is your final warning." 2 days passed without a response. Then came the real kicker. I came home from the grocery store to find a crew of landscapers digging trenches along the edge of the lake. They were installing concrete posts and rope fencing, cutting off access to the water from my side. One of them waved at me like this was just another Tuesday. "Who hired you?" I asked. "HOA said they're putting in a safety barrier on my property," he blinked. "They said it was community land." I called the sheriff. When the deputy arrived, I walked him down to the water's edge and handed him the same packet of documents I'd given Harriet. He took one look at the fencing and radioed for a second unit. The landscapers were ordered to stop immediately. Harriet showed up 10 minutes later, red-faced and breathless, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "The board authorized the installation." "It's a safety measure." The deputy turned to me. "You pressing charges?" I nodded. "Trespassing and attempted property damage." Harriet's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." The deputy didn't flinch. "Ma'am, if this gentleman owns the property and it looks like he does, you've got no right to be altering anything on this land." I was acting in the community's best interest. That doesn't override property law. She tried to argue, but the second deputy was already taking statements. The landscapers were let off with a warning, but I made it clear to both deputies that if any HOA representative stepped foot on my lakeside again without written permission, I'd be pressing charges without hesitation. Harriet didn't speak to me as she left. She walked stiffly back to her car, jaw clenched, fingers still wrapped around that clipboard like she could strangle me with it. But she wasn't done. The next morning, an email went out to the entire neighborhood. It was clearly written by Harriet, though it was signed the board. It accused an unnamed homeowner of privatizing shared natural resources and manipulating loopholes for personal gain. It called for an emergency meeting to reconsider community protections and hold rogue residents accountable. My phone started buzzing within the hour. Turns out, not everyone appreciated being told that their barbecues, kayaking trips, and fishing afternoons were now subject to permission from their neighbor. Especially not when that neighbor had kept quiet for years and only responded after being slapped with violations. By the end of the day, I had 12 neighbors on my porch. "Is this true?" asked a woman named Carla, a nurse who lived across the street. "You own the lake?" "Yes, and all those times we used it." "I never minded, I still don't." But I'm not letting Harriet bulldoze her way across it and pretend it's hers. An older man in a Vietnam veteran's cap nodded. "She's gone too far this time. A few people wanted to know if they could still fish." I said yes. A couple asked if they needed permission to let their grandkids swim during visits. I told them they were welcome anytime. And just like that, something shifted. The next day, a petition started circulating. It called for a vote to remove Harriet Penwell from her position as HOA chair. It cited abuse of power, unauthorized spending, and public misrepresentation of property rights. Over the next week, the signatures poured in. People who'd stayed quiet for years now had a reason to speak. Turns out Harriet had racked up quite a list of enemies, most of them too polite or tired to fight her. But now they had a reason. Now they had proof. And I had something more than just a dock. I had the tide. By the following Thursday, Harriet was visibly unraveling. I saw her through the blinds, pacing her porch in a mismatched jogging suit, phone clamped to her ear, gesturing like she was directing air traffic. Her usual posture, rigid and self-important, had given way to frantic energy. Whatever she was planning, she was in a hurry. I wasn't surprised when a certified envelope arrived that afternoon. It contained a notice of special assessment, $500 per household, to fund legal defense for the preservation of Hollow Ridge's natural resources. It came with no vote, no meeting minutes, no transparency. Just a due date and a threat. Unpaid assessments would result in property liens. That was the final crack. Carla was the first to show me hers. Then came Jim from the corner lot, then a flood of them, each identical. Harriet had unilaterally imposed a fee on the entire neighborhood to pay for her personal vendetta. I brought every envelope to the county courthouse and filed a fraud complaint under the state's Homeowners Association Oversight Act. Then I emailed the district attorney's office with supporting documents, copies of the assessments, time-stamped neighborhood messages, and a sworn statement from a board member who'd quietly resigned after Harriet's stunt. Within 3 days, the sheriff's department issued an investigative summons to the HOA's treasurer. 36 hours after that, the sheriff's office requested access to the HOA's financial records. The morning they arrived to collect them, Harriet tried to stall. She told the officers the documents were in process of being reorganized. That's when they handed her a warrant. For the first time since I'd met her, Harriet was silent. I watched from my deck as deputies carried out box after box of paper files and a desktop computer. One of the officers stopped to ask me if I'd be willing to provide a statement. I told him I'd already prepared one and invited him inside. After he left, I called Dennis again, not just to thank him for the map he'd helped verify, but to ask about the HOA's charter registration. He found something I hadn't expected. Their bylaws were never officially amended when the second phase of homes was built, he said. Technically, half the current residents aren't even under the HOA's jurisdiction. That explained why Harriet had always been vague about the neighborhood's expansion. I contacted a real estate attorney I knew, Alina, someone with a reputation for precision and a courtroom presence that could peel paint off walls. She reviewed the plat records, deed inclusions, and the original developer's intent. Her conclusion was blunt. If they've been collecting dues from homes not legally under the HOA, she said, that's wire fraud, especially if they threatened liens. She drafted a memo, complete with citations and highlighted documents, and sent it directly to the DA. That weekend, Hollow Ridge held its emergency meeting in the community park. The gazebo was packed. Folding chairs spilled into the grass. For once, Harriet didn't open the session. She wasn't even there. Instead, Richard Ellison, a retired contractor who'd lived here since it was just dirt roads and survey flags, stepped forward holding a handwritten agenda. Harriet Penwell has been placed on administrative leave, he announced. Pending the results of an active investigation into misappropriation of funds, unauthorized assessments, and fraudulent governance. A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. She has also been served with a temporary restraining order preventing her from contacting residents about HOA matters. Someone in the back clapped, then more joined in. It wasn't celebration, it was relief. Richard continued, we're forming a temporary transition committee. And we're offering full refunds to anyone who received an illegal notice. Refunds will be dispersed once the treasurer's audit is complete. I raised my hand. Go ahead, Irving, he said. Have we confirmed how many homes actually fall under the HOA's authority? We're reviewing that now, Richard said. Preliminary numbers suggest only the original 24 properties are legally bound by the HOA. That left nearly half the neighborhood free and clear. The same half Harriet had been squeezing for years. After the meeting, Carla walked up with a worn manila folder. "I found this in the HOA welcome packet from when we moved in," she said. "It was stuffed behind the landscaping rules." "Look at the dates." It was a copy of the original bylaws with no amendments, no updated maps, nothing to account for the second phase of development. It confirmed what Alina had suspected. Harriet had been bluffing all along. The next day, a local news van parked at the entrance to Hollow Ridge. Someone had tipped them off. The story aired that evening. HOA accused of illegally taxing residents, subject of criminal investigation. They interviewed Carla, Richard, and one of the newer homeowners who'd been threatened with a lien. Harriet wasn't mentioned by name, but her house was visible in the background, curtains drawn tight. The fallout came fast. A class action suit was filed by 17 homeowners, demanding restitution for illegal fees and emotional distress. The DA's office confirmed that charges were being considered. The HOA's insurance carrier announced they were suspending coverage pending the outcome of the investigation. Meanwhile, I finalized a new section of my property policy. It granted recreational access to the lake for any Hollow Ridge resident not serving on the HOA board. No forms, no fees, just a simple statement. Use at your own risk. Keep it clean. Respect your neighbors. I posted it on a sign near the dock along with a little mailbox containing laminated copies. A few days later, a father and his 2 kids came down to fish. They waved. I waved back. A woman in scrubs walked her dog along the shoreline. She nodded. Nobody asked permission. Nobody needed to. As for Harriet, she disappeared from public view. Her house went dark. A for sale sign appeared 2 weeks later, followed by a moving truck. No farewell emails, no final decrees, just silence. The neighborhood adjusted quickly. Without her constant interference, people started repainting front doors, adding garden beds, building porch swings. The place didn't fall apart. It came alive. One afternoon, Richard approached me with a small wooden box. "We had this made for you," he said. Inside was a brass plaque that read, "In gratitude to the man who owned the lake and gave it back." I didn't say anything, just closed the box and nodded. I didn't need the lake to myself. I just needed to remind people it was never hers, and now, finally, it wasn't. The forensic accountant assigned by the sheriff's department wrapped up the audit in under 3 weeks. What she uncovered turned everything from a petty neighborhood feud into a full-blown criminal case. Harriet hadn't just overstepped her authority, she'd siphoned over $70,000 from the HOA's maintenance fund into a private account registered to a shell landscaping company. The address, a P.O. box in the next town over. The signature on the contract. Her own, scribbled under the name G. Penwell Groundskeeping. She hadn't even bothered to use a different last name. The discovery came to light on a rainy Wednesday morning. I was inside organizing receipts for a separate zoning appeal I was helping a neighbor with when I got the call from Alina. "They're filing embezzlement charges," she said, her voice sharp with energy. And that's not all. She forged at least 6 board member votes on assessment approvals. That's felony fraud. By the time the local news caught wind of it, deputies had already issued a warrant. Harriet was arrested outside a boutique gym downtown, still wearing her tennis whites and barking orders at a barista when the patrol car pulled up. They placed her in cuffs right there on the sidewalk. The footage made the evening broadcast. No one in Hollow Ridge pretended to be surprised. But there was a difference between suspecting someone was corrupt and watching them get hauled off by the county sheriff in front of half the town. At the next emergency, HOA meeting now led by a newly elected interim board, Richard stood behind the folding table beneath the park pavilion and read the charges out loud. Misappropriation of funds, falsification of HOA documents, unauthorized assessments, wire fraud, criminal trespassing, and obstruction after she tried to delete several files from her computer while officers waited outside. When he finished, he folded the paper slowly and set it aside. "The DA's office will be pursuing the case," he said. "Meanwhile, we're working with the county to determine how much of the money can be recovered and returned to residents." The new treasurer, a quiet woman named Marlene who used to run the town library, handed out copies of a revised budget. It was simple, transparent, no legalese, no hidden fees. Just basic line items and a small reserve for unexpected maintenance. Then Marlene looked up and said something that stuck with me. "HOAs are supposed to serve the people who live here, not the people who run them." After the meeting, Richard pulled me aside near the edge of the field where the grass gave way to crushed gravel. "You know, Irving," he said, hands in his pockets, "I think this place might finally be able to breathe." "I think it already has," I said. The next few weeks passed in a way they hadn't for a long time quietly. The constant, low-grade tension that had once hovered over the neighborhood like a cloud had lifted. People smiled more. Kids played along the lake's edge without nervous glances toward Harriet's house. There were no more passive-aggressive flyers, no cryptic emails warning of non-compliance, no last-minute meetings. The dock became a kind of informal gathering place, not crowded, just visited. A couple of lawn chairs appeared one morning. Someone left a small cooler with ice and soda cans. A hand-painted sign reading "Lake's Edge Respect and Relax" hung from a post, and no one touched it. One evening, I was sitting out there watching the sky turn copper when Carla walked up with her dog and a paper bag. "Brought you something," she said, handing it over. "Homemade peach cobbler." I opened the bag and laughed. "You're trying to bribe your way into permanent lake access, aren't you?" She grinned. "Just trying to make sure the lake stays friendly." A few minutes later, more neighbors trickled in, some with folding chairs, others with snacks. No fanfare, no planning. It just happened. Someone brought a guitar, someone else lit a citronella candle. For the first time, it felt like a community rather than a collection of people tolerating each other under the same ZIP code. The next week, I got a call from the county prosecutor's office. The assistant DA handling the case invited me to testify at the preliminary hearing. I agreed. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Local press squeezed into the back rows. I sat near the front, waiting to be called, watching as Harriet was led in wearing a navy blazer and a pinched expression. She avoided eye contact with everyone. Her attorney tried to argue that the funds had been temporarily redirected and that the board had given verbal consent. The judge didn't buy it. The forged documents and financial trail were too precise, too damning. When it was my turn, I walked up to the stand and answered every question clearly. I explained how the HOA had overstepped its bounds, how my property had been encroached upon, how Harriet had used intimidation and misinformation to push her own agenda. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. Her attorney tried to rattle me, asked whether I had a personal vendetta against the HOA or its former leadership. "I'm not against the HOA," I said. "I'm against people who abuse power. There's a difference." The judge agreed. Harriet was denied bail pending trial. Her passport had already been flagged. She'd attempted to book a one-way flight to British Columbia 2 days before her arrest. Another charge: attempted flight to avoid prosecution. Back in Hollow Ridge, the neighborhood voted to dissolve the old HOA structure entirely. The new board proposed a voluntary community council with limited powers: street maintenance, seasonal events, and communication. No fines, no enforcement, just neighbors coordinating with each other like normal people. I stayed out of the council. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew when to step back. I'd done my part. The lake would always be mine on paper, but I didn't need to own the people around it. That was where Harriet had gone wrong, thinking ownership meant control. One evening in late autumn, I sat on the dock with Richard as ducks floated past and the trees burned orange and red across the water. "Ever think you'd be the one who cleaned up this place?" he asked. "I didn't clean it up," I said. "Harriet did." "She just didn't mean to." He chuckled and shook his head. "You ever consider running for mayor of Hollow Ridge? I think I already hit my term limit." He laughed harder at that, then stood and stretched. "Well, if nothing else, you gave us our lake back." I watched him walk off toward the gravel path, the sound of his steps fading into the breeze. I stayed behind a while longer, watching the water ripple beneath the dock. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the surface. Somewhere behind me, someone had started a fire in a backyard pit, and the scent of burning oak drifted down to the shoreline. There was no more shouting. No more threats stapled to posts. Just laughter in the distance and the soft lap of water against wood. In the end, it wasn't about fines or fences or even the lake. It was about knowing when to draw your line and how to defend it without becoming the thing you're fighting. Justice didn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it came with peach cobbler, a folding chair, and a quiet dock at sunset.